things. One was I'm going to get a little bit of background about Qualcomm. I'm sure you've heard of the company. Give you a little bit of color. And I think try and put that in the context of why Qualcomm's interested in Internet of Things and what Qualcomm's doing in Internet of Things. And then Internet of Things is really diverse, so we're going to try and give that a little bit of structure and about how we think about it. And then spend a little bit of time thinking about the technology and particularly the architecture of the Internet of Things. And then try and make that concrete. We'll stop to draw a few examples, and then just try and draw a few conclusions. So a little bit about Qualcomm. So Qualcomm's a $75 billion market cap company. It's 30 years old. It's the #1 wireless semiconductor company, or another way to say it's the largest fabless semiconductor company. We've shipped in excess of 15 billion chips in the lifetime of the company. And it's something like 30,000 employees worldwide. I think Qualcomm's really well known for its innovation and sort of leadership in technology. So it's not a fast follower company. It's a company that wants to be at leading edge, and been some hits and some misses. I'm going to talk about the hits. So when mobile phones went from analog to digital, one of the continuing technologies was CDMA, and that was more or less invented by Qualcomm. And then that became the center of wideband CDMA in the 3G standards, and sort of the same innovation leads into LTE. So that sort of advancement in access technologies is core to Qualcomm. Probably less well known is the mobile computing revolution. So we had sort of the processors, AMD, Intel processors inside PCs. And when they went into your pocket, they had to get a lot smaller, a lot cheaper, and a lot more frugal with power. And Qualcomm really led that revolution through its Snapdragon products. But you take the cell phone modems and you take the mobile computing processors, that end market isn't seeing the same growth as it was seeing a few years ago. So the company's moving its research resources or development resources into what's the next wave, which is the Internet of Things. Just a statistic to throw out there, I mean, the company's 30 years old. It spent something approaching $40 billion on R&D during the lifetime of the company. So we think about the Internet. The Internet of Things is really the third generation. The first generation of the Internet was your PC. And at least for me, the sort of tipping point was when I managed to download the Mosaic browser and could access, simple websites, and the Internet became real. And everyone's got their own sort of trigger point for the mobile phone, but it's probably the 10 years, that was mid-90s, probably mid-2000s. People got an iPhone or an early smartphone. You could see that was the beginning of the mobile Internet. And the third generation is this Internet of Things. And in some ways, they build on the shoulders of the previous. But there's an important distinction. With the mobile phone and PC business, we really could leverage Moore's law. It was a scale. Semiconductors works really well when you're building lots and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of the same thing, because that's how the process works. But when you look at the diversity, which we illustrate here for the Internet of Things, that one size fits all doesn't work as well. You've got a lot more diversity. And that creates challenges. It creates challenges around the software, which I think we'll solve with scalable, big data, machine learning. But more in our wheelhouse as a semiconductor company is how do we build hardware that sort of exploits the scale of the opportunity, but services the diversity of the segments. And what we see is, there's a few levers there are to pull. I mean, one's about building configurable design styles. So when you build the chips, we see ourselves, how can we bring flash process, non-volatile memory into chips at finer line lithography? How can we exploit, so what's happening is the transistors are getting smaller in the chips, and therefore the gate length's less. So when the gate's closed, electricity still goes through, the current still flows. So the chips are leaking more now than they were 10 years ago. And how do we address those problems? It's a different challenge to Moore's law. It's still a semiconductor issue. The other thing I'll talk about a little bit later is how you join the chips together, how you package the chips. So a lot of energy is going into assembly, and how you put multiple chips into one module and serve multiple markets with that. The next thing is the role of software. So the software so we're a hardware company, we're making chips, but the software is becoming an increasingly large component of that, so you can reconfigure the devices for different applications. So you see in our chips going forward, we put more programmable DSP, more powerful processors. And then the third leg, which is adjacent to that second one, is how do you reconfigure the processor? And people think of the Internet of Things being these devices that are on the edge of the cloud that are connected, and they're sensors sending data back to the cloud. But what you should also think about is the cloud can reconfigure the operation of devices depending on their context, depending on how they're being used and what the devices are being sold for. And that's an important step, because all Internet of Things devices do have that connectivity and allow the reconfiguration. So we take it sort of configurable hardware, greater role of software, and using the cloud for configuration are sort of the tools we see to sort of bridge the scalability to the diversity. From a Qualcomm point of view, we look at the Internet of Things in these three broad brackets. Smart body, smart home, smart things. So smart bodies, this trend of wanting to be able to understand the way that our bodies work better, be able to have better medical devices. The company as a whole is investing very significantly effectively a healthcare business plan. The smart home, how do we save energy? How do we make our homes more secure? And the smart city, how can we make cities safer and more enjoyable, but take less resources to manage? So if you like, this 25 billion is the analyst forecast. I'd like everyone to go away with the thought, this is really, the Internet of Things is how big can you dream? It's a world, it changes the whole planet. We have such fundamental problems. Think about things like hunger. If you go to the World Food Program, the problem isn't there's not enough food on the planet. The problem is the food's in the wrong place at the wrong time. So IT and Internet of Things is a tool to be able to address that. Energy, I read in the US, 60% of energy that's generated is wasted because we can't match supply with demand. Again, technology allows us to do that. And this is where I was going to make a comment about traffic congestion as something for those arriving. So, we're at the beginning of a revolution. You mentioned Twitter, Denise. I think, people had no idea that Twitter was going to have such a profound effect on geopolitics that it had when it started. Twitter's 10 years old, yeah. The Internet of Things can have a really profound effect going forward. So it's a bit woolly. If you sort of like double click then, how do we make Internet of Things edge devices? How do we make the products? There's two core components. There's the connectivity and the processing. So we're going to slide about each of them, and then we'll talk a little bit about the architecture, just give you some food for thought about how you can organize your Internet of Things solutions. So we go back, we talked about diversity. So we said we've got to build solutions that service this diverse set of markets, and we have to do that in a way that for each market we're hitting price and performance, providing an attractive solution in terms of price, power, and performance. We have to hit those things for all those diverse markets. And that's really how we pull the connectivity and the processing together. So what I thought I'd do is just spend a slide on each, and slide on connectivity and slide on processing, so you can sort of see how those things are going forward. And then we'll talk about how they can be joined together to make solutions for Internet of Things. So if you think about digital communications, we've probably for 30 years as an industry have been really focused on how many bits per second per megahertz of spectrum can we get through the air. And after 30 years hard work, we've really reached the limit of what the theoretical limits of the asymptotes being approached. But of course, we still want to innovate. So to think about communications or connectivity going forwards, we have to think rather than about the end-to-end link, we have to think about the overall system. And three examples of that are here. So the first example is we are used to, if I take a photo on my phone and I want to email it to someone in the room, I take that picture and I send it up to the base station, then it comes back down to the person in the room. So if you like, we're using the capacity, the spectrum available in this space twice, yeah? Whereas if you could have peer-to-peer communications, then you clearly get a 50% reduction in the data that you're transmitting. So what we're seeing is technologies like Bluetooth have been supporting this peer-to-peer for some time, but now we start to see things like Thread. So there's this Thread consortia, and Nest is a big customer. So if you've got a Nest smoke detector or a Nest carbon dioxide detector, these things are connected using a mesh network. And also the same thing's happening with LTE. So we're evolving the 4G cellular to have links so you could go peer-to-peer rather than via the network. So that's one thing, peer-to-peer connectivity. And that's being extended so you can actually, rather than just going from one peer to the next, you can actually go to a mesh of peers. And where that's useful is to really extend coverage. So say, for example, you want to find your car in a parking structure, and it's an underground parking structure, and I know it's on level -6. You can't get a radio wave from your phone to your car through 5, 6 layers of concrete floor. It doesn't work. But the protocols we're developing now have mesh, where you can talk to a car on level -1, which can search for cars on level -2, and then relay the message down through that parking structure. So this isn't really about increasing throughput. This is actually about extending coverage. And if you think in the case of IoT, where we have machines that we're relying on to provide us information, it's essential they can get that data back. They can't get to the network directly. They can go via these hopping schemes. Then the third leg in how we can enhance communication connectivity is through some of the software protocols. So there's a bunch of protocols. We highlighted here AllJoin, which Qualcomm's been a sponsor of, but there's others. There's Nest Weave, and Google have one, Weave built on top of Android, that really makes it simple to discover other devices and connect. So we think these three things, are moving away from the spoke and hub, having mesh networks, and having higher level protocols that make communication easier, are catalysts for driving the communication part of the Internet of Things. There's also the computing side. We try to sort of categorize this into sort of 3 sort of steps of processing inside the edge device. Then we'd wrap some things around them. So we think at a very simple level, the device must be able to detect, maybe it must be able to interact with the sensors, the direct perception. And then it must be able to make some judgments. So it must be able to take those thresholds, whether it's the temperature or the pressure or the light level, and compare them with some thresholds and make some judgments. But then sort of really turning that into some intuitive action means you've got to combine lots of sensors. And that's really where the internet comes in. Because if you understand, take temperature control in your home, you can look at the temperature in the house around multiple sensors. You can see how many people are in the house. You can make some judgment. But if you can add to that information that's coming from the internet, what's the prevailing weather forecast? What are my travel plans? Am I going to be in and out of the house by sort of inferring from my calendar? You can actually start to get a more intuitive level of thinking. So that sort of computing connected with the connectivity we see central to the Internet of Things. I think just one thing, we could spend a whole day talking about security, but wrapped around this processing is clearly a need for enhanced security. So if we're going to transition to the examples, I just want to make the point about architecture. So there's a generally received wisdom that computing in the cloud is free. And I think we should all challenge that. To me, there's 2 direct costs of processing in the cloud. One is just getting the data up into the cloud's not 0 cost. And anyone who's done any work on AWS, we have plenty of teams working on those. It's surprising how the invoices rack up at the end of the month. Yeah, it's not free to do that processing in the cloud. So when you're designing an IoT system, you have a choice where you do that processing. And I want to take this example. I said there's 30,000 people in Qualcomm. The majority of those are in San Diego, so we've got a lot of offices in north of San Diego, and we've got our own little bus system that goes around taking people from offices to offices. And I told you we're like an innovation company, so we had to have some technology on the buses to see whether the bus is full before you get on the bus. So some guys who wear sandals and beards put these systems on the buses here, and they could monitor, and then it would record how many people got on the bus and got off the bus, and send that data up into the cloud, and the cloud would process it and tell you if the bus was full or empty. So now you could look on the internet, on the company internet, you can see when the bus schedule is, and you can see whether the bus is full or not. It's kind of cool. And so it's illustrated here. So the camera would record video, put it up in the cloud does the computing. 3 people on the bus, space for 12, and that stream of data was 18 megabytes per minute, and then we sent some data down to our client on the smartphone, on the PC. Anyway, for 20 buses, it costs $1,000 a day to run the system, sending the data up, doing the AWS calculation. So, and this is where Moore's law does come to help us, yeah? So we can put lots of processing in the edge. So we can make the camera smarter. So that's what they did. They put the processing into the camera that sits on the bus. By the way, the camera chip got a little more expensive, a few bucks. But now the data, because the data is already compressed or processed and compressed, it's sent to the cloud. Much less data goes to the cloud. The magic number you were waiting for, it's $1 a day rather than $1,000 a day. Somehow it's a tried example, but I think it illustrates that the partitioning of data between the edge and the cloud is a fundamental design decision within the Internet of Things. Think about, just to dwell on that, think about the home security camera too. You could have the home security camera, you could use your Wi-Fi to put the data up into the cloud. That looks like free transfer. You still got to do the processing in the cloud. But, I think the risk we have in the future is your average burglar is going to realize there's a IP security camera in the house and just cut your Comcast cable before breaking in. I mean, if that becomes their MO, you don't really want to put all that data over your LTE connection. It's going to cost a lot for security. But if you do the processing in the edge node, then you've got a much lower bandwidth going back up to the cloud and sending the alerts. So connectivity, processing, and architecture, I think, are three key technology things. Got away. So from a Qualcomm point of view, it's interesting. It's really hard to service this diversity of products in the Internet of Things because you just need to have a broad stable of technologies that come together. And we're lucky enough as a big company to have collected a lot of that technology in terms of connectivity and processing over time. And then we can put that into these platforms and address these markets. Another difference between Internet of Things and both smartphones and PCs is the way customers operate. So when we were selling technology to smartphone manufacturers, you've got really capable companies like Samsung and LG are really capable at building electronic devices. When you start looking at smart body, smart city, smart home, you start dealing with clothing or fashion companies or utility companies or furniture companies, people very different from electronics firms that want to make their devices become Internet of Things devices. So what we found is really we have to make a much more complete solution for the customers. I'm just going to give a few examples of what we're doing. So in smart body, wearables, cameras, portable cameras. By the way, we have a drone design, and we're debating whether the drone should be in smart home or whether it should be smart body, because I reckon the drone is going to become the next selfie stick, because you're going to have this little camera, you're going to throw it in the sky, it's going to follow you around. So the drone could just 2 Christmases time, mark my words. So I was going to take one example on each, just quickly, to try and illustrate some of the things I said before. So, watches, they're really a smartphone on your wrist. I mean, it's incredible how much processing you're getting into such a small form factor. I talked about assembly, I talked about putting chips together. We take the same chips we use in our smartphone space, but we assemble them into a package that has all the capability for the watch. We wrap all the software around it, and now our customers just have to put a battery around it, and then of course they can configure it with their own software. But the key to putting lots of chips in a very small space, in that case, is the semiconductor assembly. There's lots of things we're doing in smart home. I didn't really want to go too much about this, but it tugs at another thread. The tail can't wag the dog, yeah? So just because you buy an iPhone and the iPhone doesn't work with the BMW, you're not going to buy the Audi, yeah? The phone doesn't determine which car you buy. In the same way as what electronics you have aren't going to affect which house you're going to buy. It's completely the other way around. You want to be able to select from all of the different competing ecosystems to make your house work. So the way we've been thinking about that is, rather than trying to bet on one ecosystem, we're trying to build a platform. Talks to that point I said to you before, software configurability, put enough memory on the device, make it reconfigurable, and then you can make one piece of hardware connect to AllJoyn, or whether that's to Weave, or whether that's to Nest, or whether it's to Apple HomeKit. And I think the secret for us is to put the onus on the edge device to be able to connect to lots of different protocols. Because at the moment there's far too many protocols, and it's really hampering progress for the Internet of Things. So just the last example. So again, we're doing a bunch of things in the smart city. They're listed here. I just wanted to sort of again pick one. The right-hand picture here, the picture of the guy on the stand. It's an important picture. It's a rusty lamppost, yeah, and that's really important. When we're deploying Internet of Things, you've got to be respectful of the infrastructure that's already deployed. You know, if you want to make the lights connected and act as Wi-Fi access points or collect weather information or traffic information, you can add more electronics, but you have to be sympathetic with the infrastructure that's already in place. So I guess the point I want to make here is the smart street lighting solution we're working on retrofits back into the old designs, i.e. the connectivity comes via the LTE modem, so you don't need to wire it up. Power comes from the light, and then everything else is distributed from that mounting on the top of the light. Similar with parking meters, yeah? So you want a parking meter design where you can take the old parking meter off, put the smart electronic one that reads credit card. You don't want to have to deploy cable to each of those, so LTE provides a great vehicle for getting the data back. So yeah, a few takeaways. You know, in terms of building a platform, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is say, bringing connectivity, bringing computer processing, wrapping around that the security, and then helping, you know, putting our customers in a position where they can build an optimal architecture. We need more consolidation in the protocols that are there for the Internet of Things today. It's too fragmented. It's very hard for people to get critical mass. It's hard for consumers to buy things because they don't want to buy something that becomes obsolete. So our approach to that is really collaboration, try and work with multiple protocols, build a hardware platform that's agnostic, that's software configurable. And then we think it's critical, you know, the people who are deploying Internet of Things aren't the uber geeks, yeah? They're not the sort of mass production electronics manufacturers. There's a whole diversity, a long tail of customers. And so we think it's important to sort of deal with the Internet of Things market is to build sort of complete reference designs around those brackets of wearables, control automation, lighting, as I cited in the presentation. So sort of an overview of where we are on Internet of Things. Hope that's helpful.